Deep in the unforgiving heart of the Sahara lies a ghost town made of salt, Tagaza. Centuries ago, this desolate place held a treasure more valuable than gold. Join us on an epic journey tracing the camel caravans that carried this precious white gold across empires, fueling dynasties, trade networks, and myths alike. From grueling treks across the dunes to the legacy of salt in shaping African kingdoms, this is the untold story of Tagaza. Imagine a town built entirely out of salt. Not metaphorically, not partially, literally everything from the houses to the mosque walls was carved from blocks of salt. Deep in the heart of the Sahara Desert, where temperatures soar and life barely clings to the shifting sands, lies the remains of Taghaza, a ghost town that once thrived by harvesting the most precious resource of its age: salt. This wasn't just any town. Taghaza was a mirage turned real, a beacon for the great camel caravans that crossed the Saharan sea of sand, carrying loads of salt that would be traded for gold, slaves, spices, and cloth. It was an engine of commerce so powerful, it fueled some of the most legendary African empires, including Mali under the opulent rule of Mansa Musa. But why salt? Why did people trek across some of the most unforgiving terrain on Earth, braving sandstorms, dehydration, and bandits, just to dig white blocks from the earth? The answer is as surprising as it is enlightening. For much of human history, salt was more than a seasoning. It was survival. It preserved food in a world before refrigeration. It balanced diets, kept armies nourished, and held spiritual significance across cultures. In hot climates especially, salt was life, and in Taghaza it was abundant. Unlike other mining towns where wealth was hidden underground, Taghaza's wealth was exposed for all to see. The salt deposits were so massive, so accessible, that the town's very infrastructure was crafted from its own currency. Walls glistened in the sunlight, sparkling like ghostly cathedrals. The irony: residents lived in houses built of wealth, yet owned none of it. Even more fascinating, the town was populated primarily by slaves, forced to labor in the blinding white pits, digging out salt with primitive tools. Overseen by armed guards, they worked under punishing heat, stacking slabs that would soon be loaded onto camelback and whisked away. The workers rarely, if ever, left the mines. It was a world apart, sustained by trade, but isolated from freedom. Meanwhile, camel caravans, some with as many as 10,000 animals, moved rhythmically through the dunes, each beast carrying up to 200 pounds of salt. These were no mere cargo hauls. They were lifelines connecting empires, and their arrival was celebrated with anticipation, fear, and reverence. So how did this ghostly town, made of the Earth's most essential mineral, rise to such importance? And why was salt, common today, once more valuable than gold? To understand that, we must journey back to a time when African empires were economic superpowers, when salt shaped the destiny of kings, and when every grain counted. This is the story of Tagaza, the salt-built city that once shaped the wealth of continents. And yet, despite its crucial role in global trade, Tagaza remained invisible to most maps and histories, erased by time and sand. The town's silence today is haunting. What was once a vital artery in the body of an empire is now just fragments of crumbling salt walls and forgotten names. But beneath that silence lies a story too vital to be lost. A story of sweat, salt, survival, and the symphony of thousands of hooves echoing across the dunes. To understand why Taghaza thrived, we need to grasp the monumental importance of salt in the pre-modern world. It wasn't just a condiment or a preservative, it was a foundation of civilization. For centuries, salt had a value equal to, and sometimes surpassing, that of gold. Its worth lay in necessity. While gold could decorate a king, salt could feed an army. In West Africa, where the Sahara separated empires from the Mediterranean world, salt became a rare and critical commodity. The people living in the forested and tropical regions of the south had abundant gold, but little access to salt. Conversely, the northern Sahara was rich in salt but poor in gold. This imbalance created a powerful and sustained trade network across one of the most unforgiving terrains on Earth. Salt was essential for survival. In the blazing heat of Africa, people lost large amounts of sodium through sweat. Replenishing salt wasn't a luxury, it was a matter of life and death. Without salt, dehydration, muscle failure, and even death were real possibilities. Preserving meat, fish, and vegetables also relied heavily on salt, especially before refrigeration. Salt was so vital that it became currency. Some soldiers in ancient empires were even paid in salt, hence the word salary. And the salt from Tagaza wasn't just utilitarian. It had a distinct value because of its purity and accessibility. The slabs mined from the earth were uniform and dense, making them ideal for long-distance travel and trade. Taghaza salt was cut into manageable rectangular blocks, then stacked and strapped onto camels to begin their arduous journey southward. The demand was immense. Salt blocks from Tagaza found their way not just into kitchens and market stalls, but into the treasuries of kings and the hearts of cities. In places like Timbuktu and Gao, salt became a symbol of status and wealth. A single block could fetch the equivalent value of a gold coin, depending on the market and distance from the source. This high demand turned salt into a geopolitical force. Control over salt mines like those in Tagaza translated to economic power and political dominance. Empires rose and fell based on their access to this precious white mineral. The rulers of Mali and Songhai recognized this and made the protection of salt mines and trade routes a state priority. Caravans were taxed, mines were guarded, and conflicts often erupted over control of this desert treasure. But salt's value wasn't only material, it was also spiritual. In many African societies, salt had ritual significance. It was used in offerings, in blessings, and in rites of passage. It symbolized purity, preservation, and the essence of life itself. To own salt was to be in harmony with nature's deepest rhythms. In a way, salt unified the continent. It connected people across vast regions, from desert traders and forest kings to coastal merchants and inland warriors. It was a shared language of trade, a lifeline that tied diverse cultures into a single economic heartbeat. And at the center of it all stood Tagaza, a place that might seem desolate, but which once stood at the epicenter of a booming transcontinental network. The salt mined there didn't just flavor meals. It built cities, funded armies, and helped shape the destiny of nations. So when we talk about salt being more precious than gold, we're not being poetic, we're stating a historical fact. In the right place and time, white crystals from the desert were worth more than anything pulled from a mine of gold. Salt wasn't just valuable, it was civilization in solid form. Today, it's hard to imagine a world where salt could command armies and topple kingdoms, but for much of human history, that was the reality. Taghaza was more than just a salt mine. It was a fully functioning town carved from the desert's most abundant resource. Situated in one of the most desolate and remote corners of the Sahara, it seemed almost impossible that life could exist there. And yet, it did. Life was harsh, brutal, and unforgiving, but the salt made it possible. The entire town was built using salt blocks. Houses, mosques, storage buildings, even boundary walls were made of salt. These blocks were stacked and carved like stone, their crystalline structure strong enough to withstand the occasional winds, but vulnerable to the rare desert rains, which could wash away entire walls in hours. The image is surreal. a shimmering monochrome world glinting under the scorching sun, where the very fabric of your home could dissolve if touched by water. But make no mistake, this wasn't a place of luxury. Tagaza was primarily a work site, populated mostly by enslaved laborers who had been brought from various parts of West Africa. These men toiled in the salt pits from sunrise to sunset, carving massive slabs from underground seams of solid salt. They worked without advanced tools, just crude iron picks and baskets. Each day they would dig, haul, and stack in near total silence, their energy sapped by the relentless heat and the weight of their burden. Above ground, guards and overseers, often sent by the Mali Empire, kept watch. Their task was twofold: to ensure that the salt was mined efficiently and to prevent any rebellion or escape. Tagaza was a prison in all but name. The enslaved rarely left the mines, had no families with them, and were rotated only when their health broke beyond repair. Few returned home. Many died in the mines and were buried in shallow graves marked by nothing more than a few stones. Despite these horrors, Tagaza had to be supplied and maintained. Caravans from the north brought dates, water, millet, and cloth, basic necessities to keep the workforce alive. These provisions were managed by a small class of administrators and merchants who acted as intermediaries between the empire and the mine. They lived in slightly better conditions, though still entirely surrounded by salt and sand. Storage was another challenge. Salt was valuable and vulnerable. Special salt houses were built to hold the most pristine slabs, protecting them from the occasional rain and potential theft. The salt was classified by quality and cut into standardized shapes to facilitate trade. Higher quality salt was stacked meticulously and often reserved for elite markets in Timbuktu, Gao, or further into North Africa. Once enough salt was ready, massive caravans were assembled. These were logistical marvels, organized months in advance. Camels were fed and trained, routes scouted, and guards hired. The salt was then loaded, block by block, onto the backs of camels, sometimes up to 5 blocks per animal. Each caravan could number in the thousands, stretching for miles across the desert, a serpentine line shimmering in the heat. These caravans didn't just take salt out of Taghaza, they also brought information, gossip, political updates, and even occasional letters or messages. In a way, Tagaza was connected to the world, even if its residents were cut off from it. The salt mines became nodes in a much larger communication and trade system that united African empires with Mediterranean merchants, Islamic scholars, and European observers. Interestingly, even though the town's infrastructure was entirely salt-based, the people of Tagaza lived without personal wealth. The wealth they extracted went directly to imperial treasuries. The salt was taxed by the empire, and only authorized merchants could profit from its trade. Tagaza was a gold mine for kings, but a graveyard for its workers. One of the few first-hand accounts we have of Tagaza comes from the famous traveler Ibn Battuta, who visited the site in the 14th century. He described it as a place of misery and labor, devoid of trees, gardens, or pleasure, just salt and suffering. His words painted a picture of a place where life was valued only for its output, where human dignity was buried under layers of salt. And yet, for centuries, this grim outpost was a heartbeat of wealth and power. Empires depended on it. Kings guarded it. Traders risked their lives to reach it. Taghaza, for all its brutality, was indispensable. Its haunting silence today belies the thunder of picks, the chants of exhausted workers, and the cries of camels that once defined its rhythm. It was a town where every wall whispered stories of labor, survival, and exploitation. Taghaza wasn't just a salt mine. It was the cost of empire made visible in white, crystalline walls. Even now, the wind-blown ruins of Tagaza remain a solemn testament to the price of progress. Each crumbling wall and salt-stained slab is a silent witness to the countless lives spent carving wealth from the earth, forgotten by time, remembered by salt. Without the camel, Tagaza's salt might have remained buried forever. The camel was the miracle machine of the desert, the ship of the Sahara, able to go for days without water, carry heavy loads, and navigate the arid terrain with ease. Camels made the impossible journey possible. Their endurance turned an ocean of sand into a bustling highway of trade. The trans-Saharan caravans were among the most awe-inspiring logistical feats of the ancient world. A single caravan could consist of 1,000 to 10,000 camels, each carrying up to 200 pounds of salt. These camel trains stretched for miles across the dunes, their footsteps creating grooves in the sand that would be followed for centuries. Caravans usually began their journey from the salt mines of Tagaza in the north, winding their way toward major trade cities like Timbuktu, Jenne, and Gao. From there, salt would continue on to the gold-rich forests of the south or across the Mediterranean into Europe. Each leg of the journey was perilous. Bandits, sandstorms, extreme temperatures, and disorientation claimed many lives. Entire caravans were known to disappear without a trace. The men who guided these caravans, called Azala or Azalai depending on the region, were experienced desert navigators. They memorized celestial patterns, understood the geography of dunes and rock formations, and could read wind direction like a book. These skills were not just helpful, they were the key to survival. An error in navigation could doom an entire caravan. Preparation was everything. Before departure, camels were fattened and rested, water containers were patched and tested, and dates, grain, and dried meats were stockpiled. Salt slabs had to be perfectly balanced on camelbacks to avoid injury. Each camel's saddle and cargo was carefully adjusted. Even the order in which camels walked was arranged to maximize efficiency and reduce confusion. At night, the desert turned frigid, and the caravans often marched under the moon to avoid the searing heat of the day. Fires were kept small to conserve wood. Songs, prayers, and rhythmic chants echoed across the dunes, helping to keep spirits high and camels calm. Salt wasn't the only cargo. These caravans also carried ostrich feathers, ivory, cloth, spices, slaves, and news. They functioned as cultural arteries, spreading stories, ideas, and languages, along with physical goods. Muslim scholars and griots, oral historians, often traveled with caravans, transmitting religious teachings and epic tales from one end of Africa to the other. The arrival of a caravan in a major city was a spectacle. Markets buzzed with anticipation. Merchants prepared their stalls, rulers sent envoys to negotiate, and crowds gathered to watch the endless stream of animals and goods. For cities like Timbuktu, the arrival of salt was as significant as the harvest. It was a sign of prosperity and connection to the wider world. The economic impact was enormous. Caravans made possible the prosperity of inland cities, transforming them into hubs of learning, culture, and politics. Timbuktu's rise as a center of Islamic scholarship was fueled in part by the wealth generated from the salt trade. The great mosques and universities of the region owe their existence to the backs of camels and the men who led them. Despite their importance, caravan life was punishing. Travel could take weeks or months. Men suffered from dehydration, injuries, and exhaustion. Camels occasionally died from overwork or starvation, but the rewards were great for successful merchants. A single trip could result in a fortune. And for empires, each caravan meant more taxes, more influence, and more power. Over time, the caravan routes themselves became etched into history. Paths like the Tanasrooft and the Taghaza corridor became legendary. Stories of bravery, survival, betrayal, and fortune surrounded them, turning the desert into a landscape of myth as much as geography. Even today, remnants of this ancient trade endure. In parts of Mali and Niger, smaller caravans still travel by camel, echoing the rhythms of their ancestors. Though trucks and planes have taken over much of modern logistics, they can't replace the legacy left in the sands by those ancient salt bearers. The camel caravans of Tagaza were more than just transport. They were the veins of empire, carrying not just wealth, but the very lifeblood of civilization. Their legacy isn't just history, it's heritage, echoing across the dunes with every hoofbeat that still graces the Sahara. Salt was not merely a product of empires, it was one of the forces that created them. In West Africa, access to salt transformed regional chieftains into kings and kings into emperors. Among the first to harness its potential was the Ghana Empire, followed by the Mali and Songhai empires. These powers didn't just trade salt, they controlled it, and in doing so, controlled wealth, influence, and regional dominance. The Ghana Empire, which flourished between the 6th and 13th centuries, built its economy around trade. At its heart was the exchange of gold from the forests of the south for salt from the northern deserts. Ghana's rulers taxed the trade routes, ensuring that a portion of every salt and gold transaction filled their coffers. This strategy enabled them to fund armies, build cities, and expand their territory. The capital, Kumbi Saleh, became a vibrant commercial hub where Arab traders, Berbers, and African merchants mingled. But it was the Mali Empire that truly demonstrated salt's potential to elevate a kingdom into a continental powerhouse. Under the legendary rule of Mansa Musa in the 14th century, Mali became synonymous with wealth. Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 became the stuff of legend. He brought so much gold with him that he disrupted economies across North Africa and the Middle East. But what is often forgotten is that this gold was largely secured through the empire's control over salt routes. Taghaza played a central role in Mali's economic engine. Mansa Musa ensured that caravans moved efficiently from the mines to the cities with state oversight, ensuring consistent quality, fair taxation, and protection from raiders. Salt's predictable value allowed Mali to engage in complex trade negotiations with North African and Mediterranean states. It also enabled the rise of cities like Timbuktu, which thrived not just on commerce but also on scholarship and spiritual learning. The Songhai Empire, which succeeded Mali, followed the same model. At its height in the 15th and 16th centuries, Songhai controlled the critical route between Tagaza and Gao, its capital. Like Mali, Songhai used a centralized administration to oversee salt extraction, caravan movements, and market regulation. It also relied on salt revenues to fund its standing army and monumental architecture. The rulers of Songhai understood that whoever controlled salt controlled the future. But the influence of salt went beyond commerce and infrastructure. It affected governance. Empires created ministries to oversee trade and mining operations. Legal systems developed to handle commercial disputes involving salt. Even religious leaders became involved, ensuring ethical conduct in the market and blessing the caravans before departure. Salt was more than an economic commodity. It was embedded in the political and spiritual DNA of these civilizations. These empires didn't merely exploit salt, they elevated it into a symbol of divine favor and imperial strength. In royal courts, salt was presented alongside gold as a display of a ruler's power. Tributes paid by vassal states included salt blocks. Even treaties were sealed over shared meals, with salt being part of the ritual to signify trust and longevity. The sheer scale of these operations is hard to fathom today. Hundreds of thousands of tons of salt moved across the Sahara each year, not by machines or ships, but by camels and human resolve. This flow of salt sustained cities, armies and dynasties, and its disruption often heralded political decline. When salt trade routes were contested or collapsed due to war, climate shifts, or new maritime options, entire empires began to crumble. The fall of Mali and Songhai can be partially traced to their weakened grip on salt logistics. Once the lifeblood of their economies faltered, the organs of state could no longer function. Salt did not just rise with empires, it fell with them too. The most iconic aspect of the trans-Saharan trade was the legendary gold for salt exchange. This barter system was not only economically transformative, but also shrouded in myth and fascination. For centuries, salt from the north met gold from the south at bustling markets deep in the heart of West Africa, fueling stories of kingdoms paved in wealth and markets overflowing with riches. In cities like Timbuktu, Jenne, and Gao, massive slabs of salt from Tagaza would be exchanged, pound for gold dust or nuggets. While this wasn't always a literal one-to-one trade, there were moments in history where salt and gold held nearly equal value. In regions with an abundance of gold but little access to salt, this trade was a lifeline, economically and physically. Kings and merchants alike recognized the strategic importance of maintaining favorable salt-for-gold exchange rates. Much of this trade was conducted in silence, literally. The silent barter system was a fascinating form of communication, used especially between Arab traders and local gold miners, such as the Wangara people. Traders would leave their goods, including salt, at a designated spot and then withdraw. The local miners would arrive, inspect the goods, and leave an amount of gold they deemed fair. If the offer was acceptable, the traders would take the gold. If not, the locals would return and adjust their offer without a single word being spoken. This practice underscores just how valuable salt was in the savanna and forest regions. In fact, some rulers controlled salt prices the same way modern governments control oil or currency. By adjusting trade taxes and limiting salt distribution, they could influence local economies, reward allies, or punish rebellious territories. Markets became spectacles of color, noise, and wealth. Salt traders from the north and gold merchants from the south would gather for days of bargaining, celebration, and ritual. Drummers played. Griots recited oral histories. Deals were struck, not just with coin or dust, but with symbolism and reputation. The legendary status of this exchange even captured the attention of foreign travelers. Ibn Battuta wrote in awe of the markets and the precise system of trade. Later, European explorers, hearing tales of cities where gold was traded like grain, were drawn deeper into the continent by the lure of limitless wealth, fueling centuries of colonial ambition. But beyond the legends and luster, the gold for salt trade was deeply practical. It balanced regional needs with geographic resources. It connected ecological zones from forest to savanna to desert, and brought together people of radically different cultures, faiths, and languages. This trade not only financed empires but built relationships across civilizations. The slabs of Taghaza's salt did more than preserve food. They preserved diplomacy, trust, and the rhythm of commerce across an entire continent. Even today, historians view this system as a remarkable example of ancient economic sophistication, built not on exploitation but on mutual dependence, cultural etiquette, and trust. And in that sense, the gold for salt trade wasn't just legendary, it was foundational. For centuries, Tagaza stood as a pillar of empire and commerce, a gleaming fortress of salt in the Sahara. But no empire lasts forever, and neither do its outposts. The decline of Tagaza was as inevitable as the shifting sands that buried parts of its legacy. Several forces contributed to its downfall. Chief among them was the fall of the Mali Empire and the rise of competing powers. As Mali's influence waned in the late 15th century, it struggled to maintain control over distant outposts like Taghaza. Without a strong imperial presence to secure trade routes and oversee mining operations, the town became vulnerable to attack and neglect. One of the critical blows came from the Moroccan invasion of Songhai in 1591. Though Tagaza was no longer under Mali's rule by then, the political instability that followed disrupted caravan networks across the Sahara. The violence destabilized the trans-Saharan economy, and Tagaza's salt was no longer the prized commodity it once was. Meanwhile, new salt mines had been discovered in places like Taoudeni, located farther to the west and more accessible to the emerging powers. These mines gradually replaced Tagaza in the regional trade network, drawing merchants, laborers, and resources away from the aging settlement. Additionally, maritime trade was rising fast. European ships were making contact with West African ports, bypassing the Sahara entirely. Coastal trade offered faster, safer, and more lucrative routes. As wealth shifted toward the coasts, inland towns like Tagaza were left behind, their economic relevance fading with each passing year. With fewer caravans passing through and diminished imperial support, Tagaza was eventually abandoned. The workers left, the overseers departed, and the buildings, built of salt, began to decay. Time and nature reclaimed the town, and the wind blew over the walls like waves erasing footprints in the sand. Today, only scattered ruins remain, ghostly white blocks slowly dissolving into the desert. No one guards them, no caravans arrive, and no empire claims them. Taghaza, once a hub of global commerce, is now a whisper among dunes. Yet the memory of Taghaza endures. In historical texts, in the tales passed down by desert nomads, and in the silent echoes of abandoned trade routes, its significance still lingers. It serves as a reminder that even the most vital places can fade when the world shifts course. Its decline wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was gradual, quiet, like salt slowly dissolving in water. Today, Taghaza is a shadow of its former self, an empty outpost forgotten by time, slowly eroded by wind and silence. Once a vital artery in Africa's commercial network, it now sits abandoned in the scorching Sahara, its salt block structures crumbling under the weight of centuries. Reaching Tagaza today is no easy feat. The journey remains treacherous, even with modern transportation. Few roads exist and fewer still are paved. The town is largely inaccessible except by camel or rugged off-road vehicles, making it a destination reserved for only the most determined explorers and historians. Those who do reach it find little more than ruined walls and half-buried foundations. Salt blocks, once the backbone of wealth, lie cracked and weathered, barely distinguishable from the ground around them. The outlines of homes, storage buildings, and mosques can still be seen, though they stand more as silhouettes than structures. The harsh desert winds have smoothed the town's edges, turning sharp lines into blurred memories. Despite its desolation, Tagaza still holds a magnetic pull for the historically curious. Archaeologists and scholars have made limited expeditions to study the site, hoping to piece together more about the town's daily life, trade practices, and its people. Yet much of its story remains buried, either literally under the sand or metaphorically in the gaps of forgotten history. Locals in nearby regions still speak of Taghaza with a blend of reverence and caution. To them, it's a place wrapped in legend, a town built of salt, sustained by empire and claimed by the desert. Nomadic Tuareg occasionally pass through or skirt its edges, their roots echoing those once walked by ancient caravans. There have been discussions about preserving what's left of Tagaza as a historical site, but the logistics and harsh environment make conservation extremely difficult. Salt, after all, is not built to last, not against rain, time, and abandonment. And yet, there's something hauntingly poetic about Taghaza's remains, a city made of the very substance it traded, returning to dust as its purpose faded. In a world obsessed with progress, Tagaza is a reminder that even the greatest centers of commerce can vanish, leaving behind only questions, silence, and the slow whisper of wind through salt. Still, the spirit of Tagaza endures, in the books of travelers, in the oral histories of Saharan tribes, and in the legacy of the trade routes it helped shape. Its story remains etched into the soul of the desert, waiting to be remembered. Taghaza may be a forgotten name to many, but its legacy is woven into the fabric of African history. It was never just about salt. It was about survival, ambition, wealth, and the extraordinary ability of humans to build civilizations in the harshest corners of the earth. The salt slabs mined in Tagaza built more than cities. They built empires. They funded armies, constructed mosques, enabled education, and connected regions that would otherwise remain isolated. Through Tagaza, Mali rose to global prominence, Mansa Musa dazzled the world, and Timbuktu became a symbol of knowledge and prosperity. All of it rooted in white crystalline blocks carved from the desert. What's perhaps most incredible is how much of this history has been overlooked. When people think of wealth and power, they picture gold, diamonds, or oil. Rarely does salt enter the conversation. Yet, in the right time and place, salt was the backbone of economy, the driver of diplomacy, and the reason caravans marched for months through blistering heat and endless dunes. Taghaza was proof that even the most unlikely place can be a center of influence. It was a place of brutal labor, yes, but also one of profound consequence. Its decline is not just the story of one ghost town. It's the story of how global attention shifts, how value is perceived, and how history can be written over when newer, shinier interests emerge. The world has changed. Trade is digital. Resources are mined by machines. Empires no longer rise or fall over mineral blocks carved by hand. But the essence of what made Tagaza important, resourcefulness, interdependence, and the human will to create meaning from what the land provides, remains as relevant as ever. So next time you sprinkle salt on a meal, think of Tagaza. Think of the hands that carved it, the camels that carried it, and the empires that were built upon it. Let it be a reminder that history isn't always told by gold alone. Sometimes it's carved into blocks of salt, left to dissolve in the wind. Even the ghosts of Taghaza speak volumes. They remind us that the foundations of greatness are often built from humble things. Salt was not glamorous, but it was essential. The empire builders of West Africa understood this truth. They saw beyond the glitter of gold and recognized the invisible power in necessity. That vision allowed them to thrive, to influence continents, and to write chapters of history that deserve far more recognition. By remembering Tagaza, we honor those stories, the miners, the traders, the visionaries. We bring light to a place long left in the dark and give voice to a legacy that still shapes us. Tagaza stands as a monument not to failure but to forgotten greatness, a civilization built not on marble or steel but on salt. If you found this journey through Tagaza and the white gold of the Sahara as fascinating as we did, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves lost history. Until next time, keep exploring.